Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, I am conscious over the last few weeks there's somewhat of a theme developing, and that is how the pandemic has acted as a digital accelerant. And when I combine that with the fact that businesses are now diving headfirst into AI, automation, and making data-driven decisions, you could be thinking, that's cool, right? But over the last few years, we've learned that the Silicon Valley motto of move fast and break stuff can actually have unintended results, especially when we look at things like social media and facial recognition. But I do think that everyone started with the best intentions. But now there are many tech firms distancing themselves from things like facial recognition, thinking, well, what have we created here? So today, I want to tackle the world of privacy, and I've found a perfect guest. And here's Jason Preez, CEO and co-founder of data privacy provider Privitar. He was born in South Africa and launched Privitar in London, I think, back in 2014, and has since taken the company global, securing $87 million in funding, which takes them to a grand total of $150 million raised. I've invited Jason on here to share his insights and his experiences. But enough of me rambling on. Buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to London so we can speak with Jason Preez, CEO and co-founder of data privacy provider Privitar. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Jason. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Great to be here. Thank you for having me. My name is Jason Preez. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Privitar. And if you don't know Privitar, we're a software company. We provide a technology platform that enables our customers to protect sensitive data and make it usable for decision making.
And obviously you were born in South Africa. You're talking to me in London today, where you launched Privitar, I think back in 2014, and you've since taken the company global and recently secured $87 million in funding, which included a $7 million investment from Privitar customer HSBC Bank. But before we go into all that, I would love to start at the beginning. I mean, can you remember where your passion for technology came from and what put you on this path that led to where you are now?
Yes, I've always been passionate about technology ever since I guess I can remember, and the thrill of being able to create something from nothing with a few lines of code always gave me a thrill. I think my dad first bought a computer home, an IBM PC, when I was about 9 years old. I remember I took part in a coding competition when I was 11, and I've never really looked back. And it's been a continuous journey. I started my career as a software engineer, but then quite early on started my first software company. Got, I guess, frustrated with the company I was working for. Thought I could do it better myself, and I guess when you're young, you're also very brave and ignorant and naive and all those things. But that first project was a company called M35. And my focus there was really on creating. We created a product, we created value for our customers, and we were acquired by Thomson Reuters a few years later, a much larger company, obviously, which was hugely valuable for me going into that environment from a personal development perspective, and also from a networking perspective. As an immigrant to the UK, as you said, I sort of grew up in South Africa. As an immigrant to the UK, having the ability to build a business network in a company that size, 93 offices globally, was an incredible opportunity. I guess what got me to Privitar, soon I was ready to start again. I spent a few years there, but technology moves at an enormous pace. And around about the time I was finishing my earn-out at Thomson Reuters, started to see this massive hype around big data, what we call big data. We're creating so much data today, all of us, the proliferation of sensors, that incredible sensor that all of us carry around in our pockets called the mobile phone. I think it's every 2 years we create an order of magnitude more data than we did in the previous 2 years. So I mean that's just totally mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Doing that, recognizing that this was a big technology shift, I was looking to find a way to make an opportunity in all of that, and recognize that privacy was a missing element in that ecosystem, and that's what got me started on this new idea.
Love that story. And we will have people listening that are hearing about Privitar for the very first time. So for those people that are just tuning in, can you just go through or give me a brief overview of what Privitar is and the kind of problems that you solve for your customers?
Sure. So, I mean, I think, we sort of have to take a step back and look at this thing called big data, and realize that data is, big data is most often data about people. The data might be generated by things, but those things often, belong or relate to people in some way. And importantly, we sometimes forget that when we're just looking at data points, that those data points actually do relate to individuals, people with real lives, and a right to self-determination. And it's a really big point to make, but we really do need to have space in our lives to have these private spaces for thought and debate. I do believe that privacy is a human right, because without privacy, we smother dissent. It's hard to drive constructive conversation where we might start with one opinion and transition to another opinion through the course of discussion. And if we lose dissent, we lose our freedom, which is really a key tenet of our free and democratic society. So how do we ensure that this key human right of privacy is protected? What I realized in 2014 was that while there was this big focus on exploiting big data, because it is such an incredible thing, there is so much insight to be derived in these data sets, and we can learn so much about human behavior. And leveraging that data, we can do incredible things like find new treatments for rare diseases. So there's huge value in that. But when I looked deeper, all the focus was there, and very little was, in the mainstream, was turned to how do we secure and protect that data. And when I looked a little deeper, I found that there was actually an incredible amount of thought and fundamental research that had gone into the space. So, we weren't having a standing start. There'd been some incredible work already done. And together with my co-founder, John Tatham, we seized on the opportunity to create a company, a commercial entity, to figure out how to make or turn that fundamental work into something pragmatic that we could bring into the mainstream, into the market. And what was so exciting about this idea was that it was so much more than just creation of product and value. It was also clearly something that would have an enormous positive impact on the world and everyone in it. So that was the genesis of Privitar. And today, what the company does is it enables organizations to protect sensitive data. That's often personal data like your health record or your location data from your mobile phone, and enable organizations to use that data for analytics. In other words, to use that data to make better decisions.
Love that. And if I was to go back to one of my last roles in the old corporate world there, and I was thinking about the data points there, and straight away there was all the applications, there was the tickets, the catering, the car parking, HR data, security data from every time a pass was swiped on a door in a particular area. Then you've got suppliers, and all that's before you even get to IT infrastructure and everything that's connected to that as well. So it shows you just how far-reaching data is and how many different data points they are. But how can CEOs make data privacy part of their leadership roadmap now?
Well, I think that's quite a good question, actually, because I do think that data privacy, one's attitude towards data privacy needs to be cultural, and as a result, often needs to come from the very top in an organization. I think every business, though, should be thinking about data and using data to drive decision making. I think that's very sensible. But at the same time, businesses should be cognizant of the fact that using that data can be perilous. And a misuse or a breach can result in a very significant fine. Now we've got new data regulation and laws in over 150 countries, I think it is, globally today. And along with those fines, we also see huge damage to our reputation. We can see customers leaving the business. So the key is, how do you create a mindset in your organization where you turn data into an asset instead of this contingent liability? And this is where data privacy can be very significant, because if we design into the system across all of those dimensions at an intrinsic level, the sort of posture, the privacy posture, where we only reveal the information that we require in any context, no more, where we're very careful about how we manage data, where we're very respectful of where that data is coming from, we can actually very quickly turn this into a competitive advantage. And this concept is not new. Privacy advocates and early thinking in the space has been going on for probably 2 decades, and we've been talking about privacy by design certainly for over a decade. But this massive increase in the amount of data being generated and used, this big data piece, makes it a real and urgent need today. Privacy by design results in less friction because we've put these controls in place. It means we have more data available for use. It means we have better quality data available for use. We have better trust relationships with our customers. And in much the same way that we've learned, over the years, that good security engineering returns multipliers on investment, I think the same can now be said to be true for privacy engineering. So from my perspective, that just makes it absolute common sense for leadership and companies to adopt this approach.
I think where it also starts to get a little bit dangerous is we've got all these masses and masses of data, and like you said, it's just growing exponentially every year. But what happens when we start feeding that data into AI algorithms, and in particular in terms of HR, we're starting to see inherent bias and what that can do too to organizations. So what do you think things like that mean for leadership as well when we're talking about the topic of HR and the bias in data?
Yeah, I think this is a really tricky topic, actually, because increasingly we are concerned that data-driven decision-making, which is often, as you alluded to, decision-making made by machines or using machine learning, we're increasingly concerned that these things can lead to biased or unfair decisions. And, there are many reasons for that. We often see that, for example, when our machine learning algorithms have been trained with historical data sets, because historically we've acted in a biased, unfair way, that data, if used to train algorithms today, results in the same sort of propagation of those bad behaviors. So I guess the question is, how do we correct? And we see this across the board. It happens in HR. It happens in decision making. Perhaps a good example is actually in education, where we could illustrate and say a seemingly obviously positive thing. Should we be looking to get more underprivileged children into Harvard, our top universities? And I would say inherently the answer to that is yes. That seems like a really good idea, and we probably should be doing that. However, if that selection criteria was by any other process than through merit, in other words, selecting students with the top grades, here's a question: are we being unfair to kids who went to top schools, right, and still got the top grades? So that's quite there's a bit of a debate there, and it really depends on your definition of fairness. But if we look at the data itself, if you say, well, does privacy have a role to play here? If we say, well, if we take out some of the elements in that data, for example, which senior school that individual went to, or what race they are, or gender, or whatever, then it might seem common sense. Well, if we take that out, that might improve the situation. But really what it means is that you may lose the ability later to correct for any structural unfairness, should you choose to do so. And you also, if you remove that data, you also limit your understanding in what's going on. So fairness, bias in this context is a very tricky topic. because there's rarely, or very rarely, a single clear definition of what fair is, and it basically boils down to trading off one kind of an unfairness against another until you get a compromise that society is happy with. So clearly not straightforward, and I think there's a huge amount of work to do in this area, and it's a topic that we're very interested in and working on and very passionate about.
Yeah, you're so right in what you're saying. There is an incredibly tricky and complex subject. But I think if you look in so many of the different areas, there is just so many big questions. For example, in the last 6 months, I'm incredibly curious about how COVID-19 and how that's going to impact businesses' approach to data privacy, especially as we're starting to see an increase in contact tracing in the workplace and beyond. And of course, depending on where you live, it could depend on which contact tracing app you have. Some will be decentralized, some will be centralized, which will have data around where you go, who you spend the most time with. Again, it's a very tricky topic, but what effects do you think that will have?
Well, I think the crisis has done a number of things. I think it certainly emphasized and highlighted some key points here. You mentioned contact tracing. I think this is a great example of where there's been an appeal by governments on a global basis to citizens to download an app and share incredibly private and intimate information with the government in I guess what is ostensibly promoted as for the greater good. And what that experiment has shown us is just how little trust and confidence most of the populations in these countries have in governments, because the take-up and adoption of these apps has been so dismally low. So it's proven that really without trust and confidence, data sharing and a healthy data ecosystem is really a non-starter. So I think that's been a very clear message, and we can use that example, without getting into the debate as to whether we think contact tracing has any merit or not. But I think it's really emphasized that point. However, when we take a step back and we slow down and we carefully consider and design a system with privacy and trust in mind, when we're very open and transparent and we communicate that to the citizen, to the consumer, to the data subject, then I think we see a much better result, and we'll see better adoption of these things. More generally, though, I think the crisis has also highlighted the importance of having high quality of data available for analysis and use. The data has been such a key element, whether it's understanding the pandemic and how the pandemic is unfolding, or whether we want to plan a response, or whether it's about developing therapeutics or a vaccine. Data is really driving all of that and is absolutely critically important. And the systems that we've had in place for assuring the availability of these data sets have evolved incredibly rapidly over the past 6 months as a result. I mean, we've seen, it's not controversial to say that digital transformation has, been forced to accelerate at an incredible rate over the last 6 months. We've seen years of progress. But, I think there's a caution there too, which is that we need to take the time and the effort to ensure that rapid evolution, when things calm down and they are then passed under the inevitable scrutiny that will come over these systems, that they're not found to be wanting and untrustworthy, and and that there hasn't been abuse of the banner of the crisis to push things through that are not quite right. Because I think if that is found to be the case, that'll be enormously damaging. Again, to that trust relationship we have with governments. We saw a similar thing in 9/11, when a huge amount of legislation was rushed through in the wake of the terrorist attacks, and have spent the last decade sort of having to unpick that, and that's created a lot of distrust in governments and so on. And so, I think we need to learn that lesson and ensure that we move fast, but also move with integrity.
Yeah, I think there's so much more awareness around it now because, like you say, trust and confidence is paramount. And I think very often, for the most part, most governments and businesses and tech firms are doing things for the greater good and the right reasons. But of course, Silicon Valley and a lot of tech firms throughout the years have had this motto of move fast and break stuff. And then we're starting to see with social media that actually, because we didn't look further ahead, we're now creating a different set of problems. So I think everyone's a little bit more cautious and thinking about those future implications. So for business leaders, what kind of ethical concerns surrounding data privacy are hot right now, do you think, especially around how businesses can move forward without jeopardizing employees or customers' personal data or productivity? Because it's such a fine balance, isn't it?
Yeah, just speaking to your quote there about move fast and break things, I think there's another quote from the U.S. Marines, and they say, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And so I think there's some, something to be taken from that. In other words, sometimes you've got to slow down to speed up. When it comes to ethical concerns around data privacy and use, I think there's just one key lesson that we've learned through this whole thing, and that is that we need to act with respect for the data subject, and what we do needs to be done with transparency and honesty. And if you do that, then I think you're operating in line with what people's expectations are today. We always say all this legislation, all the changes in the law can be quite confusing and difficult to understand. But at the end of the day, there's one simple test, which is that, if I were to explain to my customer or my employee or my student exactly what I was doing with their data, would there be any negative surprise? Would there be any reaction to that process? And if the answer is yes, then you're probably on the wrong side of the law. And so, I think that's really a good rule to exercise. Just ensure there are no rude surprises, and that probably means you're staying on the right side of the line. And there really is no excuse for that anymore. We can communicate, we can leverage technology to accomplish everything we need to do in these contexts, without creeping across that line.
And I'm glad you brought up that line and legislation and not breaking the law, because we've also seen GDPR and over in the US, the California Consumer Privacy Act being enforced now. But what do you think that means for further legislation, not just in the US, but beyond and everywhere in the world?
Yeah, I mean, regulation is today really a feature on a global scale, and I'm sure this landscape will continue to evolve and develop, and we'll see new and refined laws at every level. I think it's true to say every company is now a regulated entity when it comes to data processing, and that's a huge leap for industries that have historically had very light regulation, less of a heavy lift for traditionally regulated industries. Ultimately, though, I think that I would urge leading companies to get ahead of the regulation. It's really the low watermark. And go back to that point. Let's turn data privacy and our management of data into an advantage instead of a burden. Many of these laws and regulations, starting with the GDPR, really, which I think is still the gold standard, we're aiming to achieve similar things at the highest level. They were put in place to ensure that organizations working with data were respectful of data subjects, to build trust and confidence in the data ecosystem, to reduce friction in that ecosystem. That all seems like a no-brainer to me, and actually better for the commercial world in general. And so, really it goes back to that test. If you're doing anything that's an unpleasant surprise for your customers today, you're on the wrong side of that line, and there's no excuse for it. And frankly, by instituting these practices and by getting ahead of these regulations, it's just good business. Knowing what data you have, how you can use it to improve your business, and doing so in a way that builds the trust and confidence of your customer. I mean, to me, that's just plain common sense.
And another topic that I'd love to bring up before you go today is just go slightly off topic here, because you've enjoyed so much success. And I know we've got a lot of startup founders listening from all over the world. So I'd love to ask, what would be the biggest lessons that you've learned on your startup journey from right when you launched to raising 87 million in your Series C funding? Because I think it's so valuable, because there'll be so many people listening at various stages of their own startup career. But is there anything that stands out that you could share?
Oh, wow. Yes, sure. I mean, it's been an incredible journey with Privitar, and all the things that led to this, to even to the starting the company in the first place. I think creating and building a company is a thoroughly rewarding experience, and I would highly recommend it. Privitar is certainly for me much more than a commercial endeavor, given the imperative for us to use data for good and the positive impact of privacy on the world. So for me, it's much more than just, that commercial journey. But startups are never easy. There are truly exhilarating apps, and probably several more of the inevitable downs. I think for me, that one of the biggest lessons that I've learned and keep learning is that it's very much about the people you journey with. The team that you recruit at the very beginning has an outsized impact on the speed of progress and your ultimate success. The board and advisors that are supporting the company's strategy and growth, the investors that join you on the journey, choose incredibly carefully. You can't apply more attention to this and on these fronts. So that is a key continual lesson and piece of advice that I'd give. I'd also say that, if your ambition is to build a large, enduring company, then you need to prepare for a really long haul. It's certainly a marathon and not a sprint. However, the company rapidly evolves from stage to stage, and each stage is so different in so many ways. It feels like not so long ago that we were 20 people. Today we're almost 200. And it's a very different operating rhythm, very different demands on me as a leader as you transition from stage to stage. So keep an eye on the finish line. Always, know where you're going and understand that trajectory, but also make sure that you're completely immersed in the stage that you're in. And that gives you the right, or enables you to earn the right to keep going.
Fantastic advice. And I'm also conscious we've covered a lot of ground in today's conversation, especially around the challenges facing businesses with privacy and data, etc. So can you tell me a little bit more about the role that you'd see Privitar playing in that, not just now, but in the future, and along with anything else you can share with us about that road ahead?
Sure. I mean, at Privitar, we are 100% focused on protecting the world's sensitive data for insight and decision making. Every quarter, we're making our platform more comprehensive, more versatile, and today with a significant focus on cloud architectures and helping companies move into these much more flexible, modern platforms. So, please do follow us on LinkedIn, keep abreast of progress, and we're also, recruiting heavily today, particularly in technical roles. So reach out directly if you'd like to learn more.
Excellent. And there are that many different domains out there at the moment, from .ai to .io to .uk. So could I just ask that you remind everyone listening of the Privitar URL as well, just for anyone that wants to check you guys out?
Sure. We're quite traditional in that sense. Privitar.com, or drop me a note, jason@privitar.com.
Fantastic. Well, I'll add that link to the website on the blog post that will accompany this episode. Well, more than anything, just a big thank you for coming on here and talking about the big topic of privacy, especially around data decision making and the insights that surround that. So much valuable information for business leaders, and your little nugget there on the lessons you learn. Great advice for startup leaders. But more than anything, just a big thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Neil. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for your interest.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground there. Everything from HR and bias in data to GDPR, CCPA to ethical concerns surrounding data privacy and how businesses can move forward, but without jeopardizing employees or customers' personal data or productivity. Food for thought indeed. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. All links to the social channels at the bottom of the site. And there's also links to over 1,350 podcast episodes. More than enough to keep you all busy and quiet. But we're out of time again, I'm afraid. So meet me again tomorrow, same time, same place. We'll do it all again, but with a different guest from a different industry. And I'll speak to you all then. So thanks for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.